I was talking to my dad about this one time, right? There's people that like to talk about stuff, like how to fix something, and then there's people that actually fix it, right?
Bruce. Oh yeah. Bruce.
Welcome everyone to the Bizarre Brews podcast. Welcome Michael to the show, and the audience is like really excited to hear from you. You have a really unique experience where you've worked in both industry, private sector, and then startup experience. So welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's
Yeah.
exciting to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining on a Friday evening when you like people should be going out with their family and you're here spending time with us. So let's just dive right in. Why don't you give us some like introduction and background about how you got started into tax and what brought you in? Let's start from college and then take us from there.
Yeah, so I'm from the Chicago area. I went to DePaul, which is a college in like downtown Chicago. You know, I've kind of gravitated towards accounting early on in my career in college. I've always just appreciated I would say the objective nature of accounting, where you always know if you have the right answer typically, which I appreciated. And at DePaul, I kind of stumbled into an internship. You know, actually, I wanted to work at the Big Four out of college, but probably like a lot of people can relate to, it's, at least when I was in college, it was extremely competitive to get into the Big Four. And I remember a partner at the end of an internship was like, hey, you know, you have a lot of potential, but you just don't have any experience yet. So, you know, we're going to move on with other people, which, you know, was a little bit of a defeat early on in my career. It ended up being a blessing because I went to a company called Illinois Toolworks, or ITW, which is a large conglomerate company in the Chicago suburbs. And I really learned a lot there. You know, they're a global company, a very, very large global company. They had a lot of interesting tax issues, you know, technology. I got exposed to Oracle, to stuff like Corp Tax, and also international like tax planning strategy, which was just a really great, I think, start to my career. And in working there, I worked with everyone in the Big Four, and I always appreciated the depth of knowledge that people had in the Big Four, just because they had seen so many different fact patterns and experiences. So I gravitated back to go to KPMG in Chicago, and was in the international tax group at KPMG. And I really enjoyed working there. I got to work on a lot of big companies, private equity companies. And I think it kind of came true what my hypothesis was, that, you know, you really get to see a lot of different types of fact patterns, and you get to work with a lot of smart people. I think having that experience at a company made me want to gravitate back to being in industry. And I think the reason why was I really appreciate looking at different components of a business, right? Like you have the finance organization. When you're just at KPMG, you're very focused on just doing tax. And I was in international tax, so you're even more focused on one segment of tax. But when you work at a company, like when I was at Mattel for close to a decade, you get to collaborate with Treasury, with FP&A, with the controller's office, and even other departments, right, outside of finance, which I think really gave me a more broad understanding of finance. And then I made a really difficult decision, but so far a really good decision, to join Ruggable as the head of tax and treasury at Ruggable. And that's been a really great experience, you know, being part of I would describe Ruggable as being, you know, a very exciting company to work at. And there's a lot of really talented people, and a lot of good issues, right? Like they're heavily in the U.S. across, you know, all the states. And then also they have an international presence. And also I think the treasury side has really given me a much better appreciation of the interplay between tax and treasury. So that kind of is just a general overview of my experience.
But so for anyone listening, like what does Ruggable even do? Like I know it's a startup, but when we think of startups, we think of like tech coming out or other consumer products. What's so unique about Ruggable right now, and how has that been playing?
Yeah, I think what really differentiated Ruggable is they're a rug company, right? You know, rugs had been around for, I don't know, thousands of years, right?
Yeah.
But I think what really differentiated them was the washability of their product.
Okay.
You know, a lot of people have kids, have pets, and, you know, typically before Ruggable was really the first major player in the washable rug space. You know, you have these nice things, and if you spill like a glass of wine on it or something, or your dog puts hair all over it, it becomes very difficult to clean it. And I think that's what really differentiated Ruggable. And then also just Ruggable's incredible partnerships with different designers. They just have an incredible design. So it's like that combination of design and washability, and they are very much like an e-commerce company, which I think is also interesting.
Yeah. Okay. So, and they're a startup, which is interesting because accounting, especially tax people, they want stability. They want like something that's going to be a sure bet. That's why we stay in public accounting, or we want to stay over there. How did that approach go? Did someone reach out? So you were working at Mattel, you were finance director there. They approached you, or you were looking for something. How did that go? And then what made you decide like, okay, I'm ready to leave this stable Mattel, probably like very big company, for Ruggable?
Yeah, no, someone reached out at Ruggable to me and kind of offered the opportunity. I mean, it's kind of exactly like you said, right? I was at Mattel, a very stable company. I had been there for a long period of time. I think I had a very good track record there. I could kind of talk about some cool projects I worked on in a minute, but yeah, I think it's just that challenge. One thing in my career that I really try to push myself, and I don't like to just stay in one space. I want to continue to grow my knowledge, and I think the thing that really pushed me over the line with Ruggable is they're, kind of a pre-IPO company, but also that treasury experience. Because at Mattel, I had definitely worked on treasury related projects, but like to be able to lead the treasury group, especially with a company that's kind of has aspirations of going public, there's a lot of interesting issues, and it's proven so far. I'm really getting great experience, and one thing that I promised one of my mentors that I've met at Ruggable, one of his sayings is cash is king.
Yeah.
And that's one thing I've really learned is like, you think you might know it on its surface, but when you really see the inner workings of a company, and companies report on things like EBITDA and net income, but really cash, what you're generating from a cash perspective, it sounds simple, but it really is inherently true.
So then, yeah, cash is king. So then, do you do a lot of cash flow forecasting? Did you have to learn it? How did you pick it up? At EY, I didn't do any cash flow forecasting. I barely did those kinds of analysis.
Yeah, when I started, I kind of created my own model in Excel, and I quickly realized that, because that's one thing about working at a company that's smaller than Mattel, you have to kind of wear multiple hats, and you have, at Mattel, I always liked using technology to become efficient, but I think in a position like I'm in now, you have to use technology to be efficient. And so I implemented a cash flow tool that actually like JP Morgan has. It's like one of their proprietary tools. And it's really interesting though, that space is really, I know you're, in the AI space, there's a lot of companies in that treasury cash flowing industry. Cause I looked at a lot of them before I made the decision. And I think there's a lot of cool stuff in that space in terms of like kind of tagging transactions and the ability to kind of model where your cash flows will be at in a more automated way. So that's one thing that's been kind of cool that's been one of the main things I've worked on so far.
Gotcha. Okay, so let's step back a little. Let's go back to your time at KPMG. You were part of M&A tax, and as someone who was in M&A tax, I know it's like probably one of the ones where you're always on. There's like no, usually accountants have like ebbs and flow coming in, but M&A is basically like if you're on a deal, then you're working 24/7. What was that experience like? Would you say would you go back, and if you had to like do it again, would you want to be in like federal, international, state, or would you still pick M&A tax?
Yeah, I think from being at ITW, they were a very acquisitive company, so I worked on a lot of those types of deals. I enjoyed it. I think looking back, it's hard to kind of play Monday morning quarterback with your career, because I could understand people might want to have a more, I guess, traditional upbringing in tax and kind of learn federal before you learn international, and which I kind of did the opposite. But I think that rigor, one thing I say this to a lot of people, I really view public accounting, like Big Four accounting, as like an extension of your education in a good way. Some people go to get a master's in tax or an MBA, but I think, in my opinion, like spending that rigor in the Big Four is also a really good option instead of doing that. Because number one, you're getting paid and you don't have to pay someone else, right? And number two, it's just you get to work on, the Big Four has the most prestigious companies, right, to work on and the best issues. So even though it can be challenging, I think that amount of information you can get in that short period of time, I think is very valuable.
And then any like memorable projects from that time during KPMG, something that made you like, there's always a project that comes for me in mind where I was like, okay, that is when I actually understood the different components I was working on. That made me like, really comfortable being in conversations and talking about the tax consequences?
Yeah, I would say for me, I would say it happened to me more at Mattel. Like I would think I worked on several projects in the Big Four that helped my career. But
Yeah.
I would say one project that I'm especially proud of is like kind of like that moment, like you said, where you kind of look back and you really walked out of it with, I would say, like a life-changing experience was related to our Mattel's tax provisions. So when I was at Mattel, Mattel's a very global company. Kind of happened as a couple of people that were on the provision team left the company, and we were going into a year end, and we didn't really have any kind of sustainable plan, or there wasn't really a set plan on who was going to do the provision. We were kind of just going to see how it went. And I think one thing in my career that has allowed me to be successful, and one thing that I recommend young people to do also, is to really throw yourself into those situations and volunteer and try to figure it out. And even if you don't feel like you know all the answers,
Yeah.
that can be when you learn the most, right? Is when you really get outside of your comfort zone. And that's exactly what I did. I kind of became the de facto person leading the provision during that year end. I had to engineer how their work papers were working. And, Mattel, it's a very global company. So we were sending out 40 to 50, we would call them like provision packages for different jurisdictions. And it was pretty crazy. Like people before me would manually take, like, say you calculate pre-tax income, they would take manually from all of those 40 or 50 different packages and kind of enter it in somewhere. And there was just a lot of manual work that was getting done, and it would cause a lot of long hours during the close where, in order to kind of consolidate the provision, it would take 10 days and the review was shoddy. So one thing I did that first year is I kind of researched, just looking online, and I learned how to kind of program it in Microsoft VBA. And I just really Googled things and figured out like how to make up basically a VBA formula to like pull those different cells and bring the information together. And it was extremely successful because it allowed us to be a lot faster and pull the information. But that was kind of just like, a back of the envelope solution for that year end. But then the following year end, I was like, this solution I came up with was good for 1 year, but like, how can I really make something that I guess is going to be more structured and kind of controlled versus just kind of one person because no one understood it, right? People would be like, how do you even do that?
Yeah.
And I didn't like that because for me, I always want to like install things that if I leave, people kind of can continue on and it's like a sustainable solution. So I researched and Thomson Reuters actually has a software called Dataflow, which does exactly what I kind of described. You set up one provision template, and then it allows you through email to kind of send it to all the 40 jurisdictions.
Okay.
And then you can pull it back into a database and you can query the information like an Excel add-in they have where you can kind of pull it all together and make a consolidated provision. So I implemented that the second year, and the people at Thomson Reuters, they're great people, but they were like, hey, you're going to need a big implementation team. Your guys are a big company. And I was like, I probably can just figure it out. So I just figured it out myself and implemented it at Mattel. And, it just was very successful, right? Not only there's one thing, like people are individually reviewing it, but there's a difference when you can prove through data that like you really have everything tying to your financial system like Oracle. That's the beauty of, I think, of technology, is like you can really prove without like a shadow of a doubt that things are working correctly and make sense. And Thomson Reuters kind of nominated me for like the Taxologist of the Year for doing that project. And I won that award. And, I think there was a lot of people that helped me along the way, like different people at Mattel. But I just think those are one of those experiences that, I never would have been there if I didn't volunteer and feel uncomfortable, which I think is like something that I continue to do in my life.
Okay. Wait, so let's go deeper. So what is this Taxologist of the Year award? Like, what happens? Is there a ceremony? Like, you fly in, like black tux, you get an award, like an Oscar? Do you
Yeah, no, it's
yeah.
I think it was during COVID, so they kind of had everything virtually. So that was a shame because I wish I could have went and went in front of people. But they have like an annual event where they look at, there's a lot of prestigious companies. It's all across like their different tax platforms. So I'm sure from being in industry, right? They have the best provision software, and Dataflow is kind of like which is like one source, and Dataflow is kind of like an extension of that, where it's like one tool. So you kind of submit your case with the people at Thomson Reuters, and then they go through and they look at all the different people, and then they decide on who wins, right? And there's a lot of good nominations on different things. I think the big thing though is like the tangible results that we got, because what we were doing before is we would just throw people at the problem, right? We would use the big four and we would pay them a lot of money to just kind of bring in associates and to manually do this work, which, as you know, right, like it's really not the best use of paying that premium rate for people for like a lower skilled manual work. And it's interesting though, because we can talk about it too. I'd love to talk to you about it. I think you're the guy to talk to this about. It's like, I think that's kind of the future of tax also, right? Is like trying to eliminate that like lower value work in a way with AI, or, you know, and everyone's trying to do it, right? There's all tricks, but like they're not, you know, in my opinion, it's not like fully baked yet. So I think there's going to be a lot of exciting work in that space.
Correct. Yeah. So let's talk about, like, I feel like you probably are at the forefront right now. You're taking looks like you've done a lot of research, gone through different projects. So AI is coming, right? AI is like already here implementing. There's this like heat up of happening in the accounting space. Every day I wake up, there's like 10 new tools gets launched, and like everybody's trying to capture that market. One thing I understand or I see is like you can have the best tools, but if you don't have a way to like figure out what your regular process is, where the inefficiencies are, then you're just like sticking a like really bad, really expensive. I take an example from back then. It's like, hey, you took out the engine out of a Rolls Royce and just give it a new paint job on top of it, where you don't know what's going to happen. Or you're not like understand deep issue of the problem. Like you figured it out at data flow, you figured out the VBA, and then you added the data flow on top of it. So how do you see that? And have you like explored anything or AI solutions you've implemented so far at Ruggable?
Yeah, I think that's a great kind of analogy you made. And I think it's because, you know, a lot of times the people that are doing technology things have a more IT background or programming background. And those people are smart and do a good job. And I worked with a lot of those people on like an Oracle implementation I did in my career. But I think one of the problems they have is they don't understand tax, right? So they don't have that like breadth of knowledge. So to your point, when you're trying to make a solution and you don't understand the problem fully, it can be very difficult, because then what's your solution? You're trying to do something with technology that you don't even know if it's going to solve the issue. And so I think that's where you need to your point, you really need to like understand the problem and document what's happening with the process. Yeah. So a lot of times though, I get a little bit, I kind of waver in my head though, because if you've ever worked on like a problem, you have to you can't, that's one thing in consulting. Sometimes people in consulting like to talk about process forever, right?
Yes.
And I think at some point, there's definitely a good planning exercise, but then you just have, for me at least, it's like I learn by just trying to figure it out. You know what I mean? Like you get in and which is like looking at the current process, to your point, like how, like in the example with the provision, like I had all those old work papers. I understood what we were trying to do, right? Like consolidate pre-tax income, consolidate taxable income adjustments, come up with taxable income, calculate tax expense, you know, like calculate your deferred tax assets and liabilities. But then it's like, okay, once you understand the outputs and you understand how it's working, then I quickly realized like, wow, this can improve a lot if I can figure out a way to consolidate the information together with technology. So I think you really, and I did the process though by really digging in on what was happening instead of having meetings to talk about it.
Yeah.
That's one key differentiator I want to make is like, there's people I think that, I was talking to my dad about this one time, right? There's people that like to talk about stuff, like how to fix something, and then there's people that actually fix it, right? And
Correct.
there's a difference there.
Yeah, there's the doers, and like there's the people who would talk about it endlessly.
Yeah, exactly. Especially in this area of Zoom and Teams, like, you know, you can get death by Zoom.
Oh, you could just, what I think, if I tell people, like, if you tell me the word workflow one more time, I'm gonna like shut down and I'm just gonna like shut down the meeting and walk away. I'm like, stop telling me workflow, tell me like exactly what we need to do to go from 0 to 1. Because like that's the way I think the industry is going. Like before we used to have these long cycles of implementation. Now the implementation cycles like cut down, and it's like goes really fast. And I think that helps you too, like if you're especially at like a startup, because you need those unique solutions, because you don't have time. Like like the same time as Mattel to like go from like figuring out those items.
Yeah, that's one thing I think that's a really insightful thing you said because I think it's inherently true because I have worked on projects that the scope was too big, right? And I think there's something to like having a smaller scope and something that's more achievable in a shorter period of time and breaking things up. I've always found that true in everything I work on. Like you can get a lot more momentum if you can, get people call them quick wins or I just call them trying to like break down problems into like achievable, outcomes. And I think if you do that with projects too, it's very and it's very helpful because sometimes you hear these ERP implementations or certain kinds of technology implementations and they take multiple years. I think sometimes it's because they make the scope too big and they would really benefit from like having more achievable outcomes in a shorter period of time.
So like what do you consider like your management philosophy? Like if you had, I'm assuming you work with teams, different teams, you wear multiple hats. What management philosophy has served you like really well so far in life?
Yeah, I would say I'm very much a doing leader, right? Like I think I lead by getting involved in the details, right? Like I think I think I have to be like that's always how I'm going to be.
Yeah.
So I think when you do that, then you can kind of delegate where you see fit because you're really immersed in the details. So I think that's how I would describe my management style is like not some people could say that, oh, maybe you need to, delegate more. But I think in order to correctly delegate, you need to be involved, very involved and kind of have like intimate knowledge of like the main things that are going on with what you're working on.
So like, was there like some person that like really influenced you throughout your career that you would like associate, be like, this mentor I had like a few mentors where I would be like, made me the person I am today. Some pushed me really hard. Some gave me life advice. Sometimes I still go to these people for life advice. So any people that you remember?
Yeah, I would say, the person that's been most instrumental in my career is she's the head of tax right now at Mattel. Her name's Anna. And she I think one of the good qualities that she has is she's very confident in her abilities. So she told me one time that she wants to have even smarter people around her than her, right? But some people, if I don't know if you've ever experienced in this career, they would be very threatened by that. They want to kind of be in control of knowledge and in control of like, what they're working on. They don't want someone to know more than them on a given topic. But I think one thing I learned from her is she kind of encourages that. That's your job, I think, as a leader is to hire those kinds of people. So I think and also she's just very good about developing people in their career, right? I think I was promoted 3 or 4 times under her tenure there. And I think there's something to be said about that, given this environment that we're in where, a lot of times companies look to the outside to bring in people for positions that open. But I think and it's her track record, not just me. You could look across all of Mattel's tax department. There's so many success stories. And I think it's because of her, because I've seen other leaders where they will not promote really at all and they'll just hire from the outside. And I think that's one of just an amazing quality to have is like, there's like the loyalty side, but also it's like, if you can't promote someone as a leader, it's really a bad thing on you because that means you're not developing your people. Cause like, obviously we're all smart, right? Like if you worked in the Big Four, you went to a good school, you had good grades, right? They won't let you in unless like you have these prerequisites. So a lot of times then it's like, okay, people have the talent, but are you developing the talent, right? Or are you just kind of like letting them do whatever they want and then, okay, they're not good enough, I'm going to hire from the outside. So I think those kind of things are interesting to me. And I try to give back to that too as being a leader.
What do you think like now? I think here's my opinion on like the changing role of a tax accountant. Before it was like, you come in, you do your job, great, you can have a career for the rest of your life, right? I think the job of a accountant, especially like public accounting, is changing because now you have to do your EQ is like as important as your IQ. You being able to communicate, being able to sell, and then even being able to be prompt because like your entire skill set is changing. What's your opinion on those items? Because I feel that accountants were told if you're an introverted, you could have a great career doing this. But I think that is probably going away.
Yeah, I think it's a good observation. It's a challenge right now because like you're saying with all the stuff that's happening with technology, with AI, with companies are really getting tasked to do it. A lot of these companies have already had outsourced models where even the people that when I started there, right, like there was definitely a component of I never had to prepare certain things. We already had people doing it in different countries, and I think there's a continuation of that. But I think there's always a reward for being. I think that technology side, and that's just because I appreciate working with technology, but I think embracing that, like, and one thing you said is true about the EQ, but I think some of the best partners that I've observed in my life are able to sell because of their knowledge, right? Even though they can speak and communicate, which I think is important, but some of them could be quirky, but they're so in demand because of this knowledge they have, which I think that's kind of interesting because could that start to become less in demand because there is like this AI, there is this like going to be this bank of knowledge on the internet that people can use? Like, is being an expert in one code section still going to be as valuable, right? And I don't know the answer to that, but I think that is an interesting question. What do you think?
I think, in my opinion, I like heard this, and I think I like got fully on board behind this. It's like the 1% who are like the 1% in any given, like if you could be the 1% in guilty and FIDI calculations, and like everything about those. If you're 1% on those and you can effectively use AI, then you're gonna make so much more money than you have ever have been able to make before. But if you're just like the run of the mill, if you like, I think the middle, or like without the 1%, the 99%, that's gonna start getting squeezed. Because why would they need you? Like, if all I could do is come in, do a few Excel workbooks, and I've had friends who do this, right? They're accountants. Their entire job is they come in, they do a few Excel workbooks a day, and then just go home and log off for the day. Soon enough, like, automation's gonna take over that. Like, they like it or not, they have to like provide real value. And I think in one sense, I think it's putting a lot of pressure on our next generation of accountants, because not only like if you look at the people last 30 years, they've had to do, and these kids now have to come in and they have to compete and prove their value every single day because they don't know what skill set was not going to be in demand. I wanted to hear your thoughts on it. And then that would take us into our next segment of like, if you are a student in college, what do you do now?
Yeah, no, I agree with you, right? When I was working at Mattel when Guilty kind of came out, and the Big Four quickly made their own kind of proprietary model, right? And then there's all these people that are kind of just tailoring it to your fact pattern, right? And that's kind of their job. But it's like, what, to your point, like if you could, once someone creates, which I was surprised that they tried to almost create a software in Excel, which I thought was an interesting solution, because it's like, I don't think Excel's made for that.
Actually, I was one of the first people who worked on it.
It's a lot.
Engines,
I mean, I know they have the more advanced functions now, but it's like, I don't know how they're going to maintain that. It's going to be kind of tough, I think. But I'm sure they have enough people. That's the thing, right? They have a lot of people to throw at it. But I'm sure there's smarter people somewhere, like Cortex, right? They're already trying to they already were doing it. I'm not really sure where they're at now, but they were working on kind of making these guilty calculations in a software, right? And once that kind of happens, then to your point, there might not be as much work for these kinds of people. But I think if I was starting off, and I know people are kind of saying this everywhere, but I think it's really true, is like, I would try to embrace AI. And I think some people are afraid of it, but I generally follow kind of a lot of people's viewpoint on this, where I think it's just, you kind of made this point also, is like, I think it's just going to be an incredible tool that you have to kind of save you from doing a lot of these manual things, because a lot of that work, as you know, is not very glamorous, right?
Yeah.
But that is the interesting, I guess, the interesting cross section though, is like, it makes you understand this stuff more. So like, if you don't have to do that work, how do you understand the details behind it? And I think that's one of the things that worries me a little bit about AI, is like, if people are relying on it so much, like for something like tax, how do they know it's correct?
Correct. But it's also the fact that you don't need to learn Latin anymore to be able to write English.
Yeah.
Because it's based on that. So I keep thinking about this, and I don't have an answer to it yet. Okay, let's say I have a younger brother who's like a junior in college or like a sophomore in college, and he's trying to get these internships. We all know like the pipeline has decreased again. If you look at the figures, like they're not hiring as much, or like the school. When I was going to college and like TCJ had just like been released. Like they would like need anybody. If you had a pulse, you would get in. You would be
Yeah,
able
that
to
was
find
funny because I was getting lunch with some partners maybe a couple years ago, and I made the joke about how I was like, oh, it's so competitive. It was so competitive to get in the Big Four when I came out of college, and they're like, not really anymore. They're like, we kind of need people. And I thought that was interesting. But now I think, like to your point, the pendulum kind of swung the other way where now it is, I think, tough again.
Yeah, but it was interesting because back then it was based on like the economic market factors like demanding it, right? You would go into like recession, then like a boom, and then recession again. But now you just have this big technological shift. Then it like, remember a few years ago, this report came out that like large numbers of like a majority of accountants were going to retire and we're not going to be able to backfill those jobs. And now we can say like, okay, now AI is taking over. I talked to this one guy. I was talking to him yesterday. He has a startup up in San Francisco. What he's doing is he just keeps acquiring these people. He's a technologist. He keeps acquiring like bookkeeping clients, and like he built all these AI agents. And then he has one guy who does next to work of servicing, like this one guy is servicing like 100 clients, and then he brings on 100 more, and he's just expanding that. So I feel like that is really interesting. And then more than ever, if you want to start your own firm, it's the best time. But then this question comes back, how do you learn like what to do?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it's a really interesting problem. And I think to your point, though, you use the word market. I think the market has a way of like figuring that out, because if like people stop learning, then their services won't be as valuable. Because eventually, if you have someone like in your example of doing that bookkeeping for you, and you find out that, someone's doing it that maybe didn't spend the adequate time or use some AI agent that didn't do it correctly, then there could be real consequences for that, right? And then people could kind of swing the other way. But I really think the market will correct for it. But it is hard to predict, because one thing I feel like is it's not as bad as NFTs, but I do feel like AI gets very overblown right now. There's definitely benefits, right? Things that AI can do 100%, like reading things and summarizing them, is extremely valuable, which saves people time. But I don't think, in my opinion, and maybe you've seen things that I haven't seen, but like really when like that manual work that you're kind of describing, where every company has, multiple different systems where you need to bring information together.
Mhm.
And Ultrix kind of, I don't know, have you worked with Ultrix that much? It kind of does this, right? Where you can set up workflows and you can kind of, but like that autonomous part of it where like, if you just, I don't think anything exists now where you could just be like, hey, come in this company and like look at our ecosystem and figure out how to file all of our 471s, right? Like, I don't see how AI is going to get there anytime soon.
Correct. I understand. Like, yes, we have legacy systems. I can see that. But I'm also very bullish on the fact that only 2022 that ChatGPT came out with its first iteration, and we're now in 2025 where I'm assuming, have you guys used the new Power BI or like the Excel Copilot? And I've been like testing them out, and I'm like, this is like something I would need to train like a lot, but now it's there. Good. Is the information it's giving out correct? I don't think so. I think it's like still very further away. But like at the pace of the money that's been flowing in, and then soon enough somebody has to show real impact, or the money it's gonna start drying up. Same thing with NFTs happening, or Web 2.0, Web 3.0.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting, and I like really understand like the college kids who are like anxious about this. They could embrace it, but it's a lot of uncertainty which they would need to figure out.
Yeah. No, I could. I think to your point is because it's hard to imagine how things are going to progress.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't be too worried about it at this point. I just think that ChatGPT, for example, is just in my opinion, right, it's just a much more like curated version of what already existed with Google. It's just, and not always in a good way, right? Because it's giving you the answer that it thinks based on someone else programming what they think, right? And like that can cause problems because, when you get into objective things, that's okay. But when you get into like opinions, which is a lot of text, right? Like, can we take this opinion on something?
Yeah.
How do they determine that opinion, right? Like they just look at, you feed it data, but it's like, sometimes, as you know, right, it's like you have to kind of, there's uncertain positions, right, that you don't even know if you're going to take. So there's a lot of like instincts with things like that, I think.
Yeah. It's like, how do you get to more likely than not on a position?
Yeah.
And are you telling the auditor or the tax authority, yeah, like I use like source ChatGPT wrote it? It's going to
I
be.
think what would be interesting though, one thing that, not to scare people, but I guess I can scare people a little bit, is like if like the IRS just is like, hey, we're just gonna plug into your ERP and we're gonna calculate the tax that we think you owe us based on what your US GAAP books are, because that would kind of like eliminate that, right? But it's, as you know, but the problem with that is like people aren't going to want to agree to that, because I think all these tax adjustments, like, immediately being able to depreciate things gives you an incentive, and there's a lot of lobbying for it.
Yeah.
But I think that is something that could potentially be interesting, is if people simplified what they, like the taxing authority simplified what they wanted from you and how they computed the tax.
Yeah, I think it's interesting on how that's a really good point. I was talking the other day and looking at it. So most of the accounting startups you see come out, or accounting softwares come out of Australia and New Zealand. And I'm like, that's very interesting. Why is that? So then I started looking further, is because in Australia, tax compliance isn't as big of an issue as we have over here in the US. So accountants, to make money over there, have to sell a lot of advisory services, and advisory requires a lot of analytics and analysis. So then there was an actual need for advisory to come out, and so that led to all of the startup culture over there. And then you see companies like Zero come out over there from Australia, and then over here there's Fathom also as well. So I think US might be shifting that way as like compliance. I don't think so. I think compliance has gotten more complex over the years. I was looking at the stat, like the IRS has increased the internal revenue code from 3.4 million words to like 4.4 million over the last like 20 years. So it gets complex, and one big beautiful bill, more complex. So it would be, I think it's job security for us, people who have already here.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because it's like, I wonder, that's where, like, does the IRS need all that data, right? And like, what are they really even doing with it? Because it's like, I think if I was leading the IRS, I wouldn't, they're making it too complicated for themselves. And maybe that's like the intention of it, who knows? But like, why do they need all that stuff? If they simplified how you calculate tax, I think it would make it a lot easier to enforce it. But like, it has to be so difficult. Like you said, even if you just look at the Form 5471, when I started my career, it was so much more simple. And now it's extremely complicated. And I don't know how, if I was an auditor working at the IRS, I don't know how I would find this stuff useful, right? It's just like tracking all these different, like your basis and all these different kind of like parts of GILTI. It just seems very, very complex for, what it's doing.
Yeah, one form that gives me more heartburn than anything is Schedule Q on the 5471. I'm like, no software does it correctly, and you always have to do manual adjustments. And I'm like, it's on the FTC form. Why do you need it to have me like restate it again? So I think there's duplication over there. Yeah, definitely we can get resolved. And our final question, like, what are some books or movies you recommend for other people? Like, what are some of your favorite ones?
Yeah, I'm not a big like reader of books. I've tried kind of like, I've read different books before, but I think I read a lot, I would say, on the internet. And I actually, I don't know, you probably do this too, because I know your kind of background is like, I learn a lot on through AI now, right? Like you can have like, which I find it very interesting, and then you can kind of like cross check it in different AIs, and I kind of go down these like rabbit holes now of like things, and I find that very interesting, because like you can almost write your own story of what you want to learn, right? And maybe that is like the future of reading too, right? Is like,
okay,
because like, and that's what, and they even have access to books. Like I'll even say, summarize this book for me and do it, which I'm always surprised by, because like, and that's, I don't know, that can be a conversation for another day, but like, I'm always surprised it like has these books in model,
Yeah, I would recommend you read about the case that's been going on with Anthropic and how they had to like resolve that issue recently. But that was really interesting. I agree. I understand exactly what you mean. And I like sometimes if I'm like watching a movie, I would go read a Wikipedia summary. If I'm like, I want to know the end, I just don't want to watch it anymore. That's what my has been. But now I could just be like, hey, chat, like, how does this movie end? And it could be like, this is the summary. Or I ask like, oh, why is this trending today? And then it will tell you why is it trending, and I just don't need to figure it out.
Yeah. And I think in terms of movies, though, my wife is actually originally from the Philippines. She moved here after college, and I watch a lot of Filipino movies, so I'm kind of learning how to speak the Tagalog language, which I think is also kind of interesting. when you learn different languages and different cultures. I do like to travel a lot too. So I think that's another thing, like instead of like being at home and watching movies, I really like to get out and like explore the world, because that's one thing that is really awesome it's really exciting to me is like how I think everyone has so much in common across the world, more than people realize. If you watch the news or all these different things, you would think we're so far apart on things, but when you really travel and meet people throughout the world, which I am fortunate enough to have done now, like you really realize that people are have a lot more in common than they realize.
So where are you traveling this year, or where have you traveled?
Yeah, I've been to Asia, to South America, pretty much almost every continent except Africa and South and Antarctica. But I think some of my favorite countries I tell people is I really like Brazil a lot. I think like a lot of people, I like Japan and South Korea.
Mm-hmm.
Those are like interesting countries. But I think also, I've been to some really cool places like Ukraine. Like I went actually before the war started, and I really liked Ukraine because it wasn't very touristy, and you can just feel the culture. That's the thing I like the most about traveling, is when you really can feel a different culture than what we have in America, which really makes you kind of learn their perspective. And Australia too. I know you mentioned Australia. That was Melbourne's a really cool city too.
Yeah, big coffee culture over there.
Which I'm sure we're all coffee drinkers being accountants.
Yeah. Hey, I did. Yeah, some points that I was drinking 4 cups a day. So like
those are always like the war stories you share. How much coffee you're drinking, and then you could still fall asleep on command.
Yeah, exactly. I can still drink at 11 p.m. and still fall asleep within 30 minutes. But it has been a great conversation. Thank you so much, Michael. And we've learned a lot, and then we keep to have you in touch so far. And then good luck with everything. And then whenever you're deciding to go to like Africa and Antarctica, would love to hear more about those stories.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me on the show.
Thanks.
Yeah, Bruce.